Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our event this afternoon. We're so happy to have you all here. For those of you who are unfamiliar, any guests or visitors, my name is Ryan Halter. I'm serving as a vicar here at Christ Alone, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Berg to you today. Dr. Berg is a 2005 graduate of Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. He spent 12 years, right? 12 years in Wood Lake, Minnesota, out on the prairie, getting your life together there, but then was called to WLC, serves as a professor of theology, has his doctorate from Talbot School of Theology in 2017, married to Amanda, has 3 daughters, living the dream here in Milwaukee, right? I don't have much to say beside that. I'm very excited to introduce him and let him take the floor for this exciting topic. Thank you very much, Dr. Berg.
That's premature. We'll see. Thanks for having me. Throwing myself to the wolves here, talk politics amongst any people at any given time, but especially in our time right now. We're in a place of absurdity, aren't we, in our culture and our place? And we'll try to think about why we are here and a little hope for the future. So, living as a Christian in a politically struggling world, let me tell you about, by the way, I'm against both of these images. Yeah. Let me tell a story about a Sunday and a Tuesday a few years ago. This was the Sunday that was right after the October 7th Hamas attack in Israel. And I was preaching at a congregation in Chicago, guest preaching. And it's a little storefront. And so the church was probably about this big, yeah? And I get there, and, they got a little bulletin there, but they don't have a prayer of the church and stuff, so I'm scrambling, getting ready, doing what I need before the service. And this guy comes up to me, and I'm going to use accents, but it's not going to be offensive because the accents are going to be right on. They're going to be correct. And this guy, he could have been straight from Brooklyn, he says. He comes up to me, and I'm not lying. This is how it went. He just came up to me, he said, "Are you Jewish?" I said, "I'm not Jewish." He said, "I saw the name, I saw the beard. I thought you were Jewish. I'm Jewish. Not everybody gets to be Jewish." And he walked away. He was what we call a Messianic Jew. That is someone who is ethnically Jewish, but believed that Jesus was the Messiah, Messianic Jew, and had been a Lutheran and a Christian for most of his adult life. And that was the initial conversation I had. He just walked away. So I'm like, well, I should pray for something during the prayer of the church. That long prayer, or that long prayer in the before Holy Communion. And so I'm like, well, I'll pray for what's happening in Gaza. Ukraine had flared up that wake too, and so I prayed for peace in both Ukraine and Gaza. I said, I'm going to pray for peace in both Ukraine and Gaza. He gave it to me after the service because I said Gaza. I was correct, but I did not say Israel. Yeah? And he was a bit offended by that. Now, he's a great guy. I've preached there multiple times since, and he gives it to me every time I'm there. It's hilarious. One time, this is before the service, and he's writing his offering check right in front of me and the treasurer for the congregation, and he says he always puts something funny in the memo line, like the Israeli Defense Fund or something like that. So he says, he knows I'm there, but he's talking to somebody else, but he's really talking to me. And he says, I'm going to put the Israeli Defense Fund in a memo line. Pastor Berg would want me to give it to the PLO, but I'm not going to do it, He just wouldn't let me down. He's a great guy, and it was fun, and he's just a character, right? But I learned a lesson, didn't I? By the way, I was very careful in that prayer to not pray for the Ukraine, which is how I referenced it, and many of you referenced it your whole lives. But we had gotten the memo, hadn't we? That we had to say Ukraine and not the Ukraine anymore, and Kyiv and not Kiev anymore, right? Do we call it Chicken Kyiv now? I don't know. What's going on? Yeah. So I was sensitive to that, but not sensitive to what he was saying. So that was a moment for me. I go home. That Tuesday, I have to take one of my 4 used cars. I have 3 daughters, as the vicar told you. And my main job is just to keep used cars on the road, right? I don't even need a ride to the mechanic because I just drop off the next one, you know? And in my neighborhood, which is by the airport, there's quite a few Palestinians. I don't go a day without seeing somebody in a headdress. And my mechanic is the one I like to go to for anything that's not too complicated, is run by these 2 old school Palestinian brothers from Jerusalem. Like, I've never seen them work on a car. They just like chain smoke and and they'll fix it. It'll be cheap. It may not be right, but they'll fix it, right? And I walk in, and this is how I'm greeted. Michael, my friend. They know my name. I say, do you want my phone number? They're like, we got it. Yeah. And I've struck up some conversations with them, given them some books to read. The one guy says, I'm Muslim. And I said, yeah, you can still read, right? Yeah. Oh. I made a mistake that day. I said, how's your family in Jerusalem? And it wasn't a mistake that I asked him. It was a mistake because I didn't have the next 30 minutes of my life trying to get out of this conversation. And he was upset that the news was talking about Gaza and not about the West Bank and this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, I listened. Now, I tell you those 2 stories because in those 2 situations, what was my job? They both know I'm a pastor. What was my job? My job was not to play devil's advocate about Israel and how it sometimes mistreats Palestinians. They don't have a good record. And my friend in Chicago knows that and will admit that. My job was not to slam the Palestinians to my mechanic. My job was to be light and hope at that moment. Now, it's not wrong for me to have a geopolitical conversation with either of those men. But as a person who was a representative of the gospel in those situations, I needed to be very careful. Because even if I was right, and by the way, there was no way that I could send to those 2 men, right, what was up. Like those 2 guys, I could have put them in a room and said, pick a paint color, and they would have been there for 10 years and never had, I'm not going to be the arbiter that is going to fix the Middle East in that moment, right? I can have my opinions and I can have conversations, but what I did not want to do was get in the way of a possible moment of gospel for that Christian already, but also for this Muslim man that maybe I will have an opportunity to witness to him. I was a city kid. My dad was a pastor. We lived in bigger cities. Then on my call day, I got sent to a town of 400 people. The county had 10,000 people. The county had 10,000 people. The county had 2 stoplights, and one was a rumor. I never saw it. It was on the other side. I was a fish out of water, yeah, and but it was good for me. When I came back to the city, and I got a call to teach at Wisconsin Lutheran College. My wife teaches preschool, and I said, we're not church shopping. Wherever you get your first call, you're taking it, and that's where we're going to join. And she got called to St. Philip's on the north side, which is a church that is predominantly African American, but not like because the neighborhood changed. It was a congregation started specifically for, in the 60s, I believe, specifically for outreach to African Americans, right? And they loved my family. I preached there. I still, once in a while, preach there. It's a wonderful place. I then started to help out at St. John's McGuanago, southwest of Milwaukee, and I'm a pulpit assistant there today. Those are three types of narthexes and three types of churches. Rural, one more suburban, and one urban. I'd love to tell you, we don't have time, but I'd love to tell you that the rural congregation and the urban congregation had more in common with each other than either one of them had with the suburban congregation. But that's a different story. Let's focus to two different narthexes. I remember once at St. John's McGuanago, this is after, Colin Kaepernick, blah, 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 blah. And in the narthex there was talk of the NFL. I remember this one guy said, I'm not watching the NFL anymore, because they're too political. I wanted to say, that's doubtful, but sure. Yeah. In the narthex at St. Philip's, their discussions were, I can't believe that they don't consult Colin Kaepernick about their social justice movement more. It's the same narthex, by the way. Same complaints about the coffee being too black. How's the weather? What's going on with the Bucks and the Brewers and stuff? It's the same exact narthex, but it's just a little bit different, isn't it? And I imagine one person from either side of this divide going to the other church and feeling like they couldn't get through the narthex to get into the sanctuary. The narthex shouldn't be a gauntlet, right? Where you have to avoid conversations to get to the means of grace. Yeah. And I think we need to be careful, right? We may have strong political opinions, and we may be right. We may be right. But if it is literally a barrier between somebody and the forgiveness of sins, right? If they have to have the right political whatever before they get into the place where they're going to get the means of grace, then we're not doing what we need to be doing as a church. Now, that's a simple thing. Now expand it to online stuff. All of the stuff on social media, yikes, a lot of this is barriers to truth and barriers specifically to the truth of the gospel. And I think we need to be careful what we send, what we share, right? Is that going to, you may be right, but is it going to be a barrier between somebody and the message of Christianity? And I think we need to be very careful about that. I'll give you an example here. You can't see this because it's too far away, but I'll read it to you. This was a blow up, I suppose it's, 18 months, 2 years ago already, so it might as well be 100 years ago. Yeah. But this was all the stuff in Minneapolis with the Somali daycare and stuff like that. The chief of police in Minneapolis, maybe you recognize that guy, he was making the case that we should treat the Somali immigrants well because Jesus and Mary were once refugees. Yeah? These are refugees, and they are. I don't think you want to live in Somalia. There's a reason why they came over here. And so he said that we should be kind to them because Mary and Joseph were Somalis. Now, this guy responds with this. Wild. Minneapolis police chief compares the Holy Family to illegal immigrants, not refugees, but illegal immigrants. Mary and Joseph traveled 90 miles to Bethlehem for a mandatory census. They were obeying the law as opposed to these other people. Scripture isn't a political prop to use when it's convenient. And so he is scolding this. He's not scolding the police officer. He's putting this out there for his own righteousness, right? Yeah. Now, do you catch what's wrong with that guy? He is saying Mary and Joseph were legal because they traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem because they had to be counted. They were obeying the law. How dare you compare them to people who are breaking the law? But Mary and Joseph were refugees, not in this instance, but when? when Herod came after them and they fled to Egypt, right? So this guy is going to scold us with the scriptures, and he doesn't have the scriptures even right. Yeah. So I have up there, live by the law, die by the law. You know the old saying, when you point a finger, there are three pointing back at you, right? Be careful that if you're only going to do law, if you're only going to criticize people for their illegal activity or their misuse of scripture or their faulty understanding of what's going on in the culture or their politics, you are now in the realm of accusatory law, and that law is going to come back on you. I like to do this with my students because they're about as self-righteous as the rest of us, right? And I say I could rip you apart in 5 seconds. 5 seconds, I could rip you apart. And you could rip me apart in 5 seconds. So don't try to be righteous by law. Let me rip you apart in 5 seconds. I see your Nike shoes and I see your iPhone. Are you against human trafficking, I ask them? And they all go, yeah. And I say, good. You know there's no human trafficking without a market for cheap goods and cheap hotel rooms where somebody has to clean them. You're a part of the problem. You and I are part of the problem. And we don't have really any hope to get out of the problem. I mean, what are you going to do? Go off the grid? Not buy anything? Right? You're always a part of this sinful, ucky mess. And so if your goal is to try to rise above it so that you can point down on other people and say, I'm more righteous than you, I'll rip you apart in 5 seconds. And this explains all of social media, doesn't it? That everybody's trying to be righteous. And this is actually a very profound thing about humanity that St. Paul really understood. The most profound thing about humanity, in my opinion, what really distinguishes us from the animals, is that we all seek to be righteous. By the way, even atheist scholars will say this and study this. I don't think the squirrels have conversations about how they look in outfits. I don't think they gossip about other squirrels. I don't think they're worried about, somebody getting on their land or whatever. We do, right? And if you're honest with yourself every moment of every day, you are driven in a bad way by trying to be righteous. And what do we mean by righteous? To be right. None of you woke up this morning and said, I hope I'm wrong. Right? Another way to say it is you trying to justify your existence and justify your actions. Justification, right? Being made just is really the same thing as trying to be righteous or right. It's why you gossip. I don't think you gossip just to rip somebody down. That would make you a sociopath. But why do you and I gossip? Because at that moment in that little group, I justify my existence because I got this juicy little bit of information. And if someone's got to go down a little bit, so I go up a little bit. That's why I remind my wife that I did the dishes again. That's why I get angry at people on the highway. This is my favorite. This is why 8th grade boys act like 8th grade boys. And I know because I was once an 8th grade boy. You know how, you remember, do we have teachers your former teachers? Yeah. You ever wonder why, especially boys, but they pretend like they don't care in school? They're too dumb to know that they're doing this, but they're hedging their bets because if they try, what do they risk? Failure. So they don't try. I didn't care about that anyway. Every one of them would like to be the smartest person in the classroom. Of course they would. Of course they would. But they are always constantly figuring out, how can I be right and valuable and justified in my existence here, right? It's also why 8th grade girls inexplicably still want the attention of those moron 8th grade boys. Right? Right? If you admit this about yourself, you know exactly what St. Paul was after when in Romans he talked about there's a righteousness by law and a righteousness by faith. I can be right according to some law, how much money I make, how popular I am, how good looking I am, how morally superior I am. It doesn't matter what the law is. You just want to hold on to a law that you can judge yourself better than other people. And there's a tragedy to this because A, you cannot be righteous, and B, you don't have to. Because who is righteous in your place? Jesus Christ. Right? Now, if I know that about myself, then maybe I won't press share so quickly. There's a man I know, profoundly deep Christian, and he admits, his social media is all over the place, and he admits, I can't stop. He's addicted to this, sharing things that are not so helpful for the Christian message, right? All political stuff. He's addicted to sin. He's addicted to that feeling of being morally righteous. Now, I know that about myself. That helps me. Now, how about if I know that about the person I'm engaging? Yeah? Everybody you engage has the same problem. So, I don't know if the tactic is always correct to go law against law, boom, 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 without any hope of the gospel. Only the gospel can change hearts. Only to be loved, right, unconditionally, can change a person, right? So think about that a little bit as we're going forward here. All right, good so far? So far? Okay, all right. What we're talking about here in a roundabout way is two kingdom theology. So let me give you a very quick review of two kingdom theology. There's no such thing as a separation of church and state because that's sort of an impossible thing. Like if I was elected to some, mayor of Thiensville, I would think that I would like to say I am the mayor of all my citizens, not just the ones that go to my church. But at the same time, and so I'm not trying to push my religion on them. At the same time, I can't just so easily turn off my religion because it's a part of who I am. You can't just say that, oh, I turn that off and then somehow that doesn't affect my politics or my job, my vocation, everything that I do. And so a better way to think about it is that there are two realms where God rules and they overlap. So that's why we have the Venn diagram. The classic easy example, and there's a lot of examples that are much harder to navigate, but the classic example is marriage. So the state has something to say about marriage, so they make up rules because they don't want 40-year-old men marrying 12-year-old girls. So there's rules. Can't marry your cousin. There's often waiting periods, that kind of stuff. And so the state, even if it doesn't admit it, understands that marriage and family is the building block of all society, and it needs to be regulated in some way. You need to get a license, right? Now, if one of the pastors in this church right now, in this building right now, would perform a marriage, they actually do it as an agent of the state, not the church, right? Their credentials are listed in a county somewhere, right? Not anybody can perform a marriage, right? Does the church have something to say about marriage? You bet. It is a holy estate patterned after the love that God, the husband, had for his people, his beautiful bride, right? And so those two, so you can't really have a separation, right? But there are two realms of authority there, and they overlap in marriage. That's just one example. Here's the key to it all. We understand that they overlap. You can't really have like a complete separation because you can't separate yourself. I got my secular life and my religious life. No, they overlap. We don't want them to mix. So let me repeat that. They overlap, but we don't want them to mix, because when they mix, the gospel gets lost. Now, from a secular point of view, you don't want them to mix because you don't want a theocracy like Iran or Saudi Arabia or something like that. But from our point of view, a Christian point of view, we don't want them to mix because we have something at stake that is far more important than politics right here, and that is the gospel. So if the state would do the job of the church, which, by the way, was the standard way of doing things for the vast majority of the history of the world, the state said, you can be this religion or that, and that's it. So, for instance, even up into later in European history, there were times where, like, okay, here's the deal. You can be Jewish, you can be Catholic, or you can be like some sort of Protestant. And there were some Lutherans who were like, yeah, but we're not the same as the Reformed. And then they packed up and came to places like Wisconsin. Right? Yeah, so it's a part of our history, right? Now, once you start saying you have to be that, that's law, that's not gospel. Now imagine that the church would start to do the state's job. Two things would happen. One is, if the church is in control of the state, it would be anarchy, because we forgive and love everybody. Now that never happened, but you know what did happen? Is that once the church took control of political power, well, once you get power, it's almost impossible to let go, right? And then the church becomes the enforcer of law, yeah? And then the gospel is lost. The Roman bishop actually at first was a little bit reluctant of taking over control of that great city, Rome, but there was no other power that could make sure that the city of Rome would run like it's supposed to run. But once that bishop of Rome got power, it's hard to let go. He has a new name today, the Pope. You know, the Pope had an army at once, like literally an army, right? And so you could see the problem. I'll give you an example of how this gets played out in my life when I was a pastor of that little town in 400 people. A town like that still needs a mayor. It still needs a town council. It's still got to deal with tax dollars and you know, plowing roads and making sure that the toilet's flush because there's pressure and all that kind of stuff. And they would always ask me to run for city council, not because they thought I was so great, but somebody, you know, everybody had to take their turn. You know, this guy can return emails, you know, he's on this, put him on there or whatever. I had 400 people in town. My church was 370 when I left. Like, I had the votes. Like, you know, I could have ran for mayor, right? Or maybe I would have lost. That would have been a devastating loss, right? I had two members run for mayor once. I'm like, oh my God, against each other, yeah. I always said no for three reasons. One was, that sounds awful. I don't want to do that. I would have been very bad at that. And I didn't think that people would be able to distinguish between council member Mike and Pastor Berg. And so if they want to be mad at council member Mike, which I would imagine half the town was always mad at the council at any given time, would they be able to not take that anger and that resentment towards Pastor Berg and St. John's Lutheran Church? Well, I think you know the answer, that that's almost impossible for people to do, and it wasn't worth the risk. It wasn't worth the risk. I didn't want those two things mixed up, where when I'm preaching and I'm absolving and I'm saying, here is the body and blood of Christ, and I'm baptizing your baby and I'm burying your grandma, I don't want in the back of your mind, he should have voted this way, right? Okay. All right. So that's just a very quick two-kingdom theology review. Okay. All right. Martin Luther thought we couldn't determine teleological causes. Now, I'm using a big word, teleological, so you think I'm smart, but I'm not. Don't be intimidated by big words. Teleological just means like the final cause or final explanation of something. Let me do a little bit of philosophy real quick, if that's okay with you. Okay. Imagine I have a dry erase marker in my, like a whiteboard for school. How do I explain this thing? Well, Aristotle would say that there's four causes, and one way to think about that is four explanations. Okay. The first one is the material explanation of this thing. It's made of plastic, felt, ink. I did this in high school once, and I'm like, plastic, felt, yeah. And I'm like, what about? And they're like, marker juice. I'm like, okay, marker juice, all right. That explains the material thing. Now explain the formal cause or formal explanation. That is the form it takes, not just the form, but what is the thing? It's a writing utensil. That's what it is. So I've explained what it's made of, the material. I've explained what the thing is. It's a writing utensil that happens to be a marker. The next one is the efficient cause. The efficient cause is, how did it get here? Who made it? So there's somebody who mined the raw materials. Somebody invented this, an engineer. There was somebody who manufactured it. There was somebody who packaged it, who delivered it, all that kind of stuff. And I said, does that fully explain the marker, what it's made of, what it is, and how it got here? By the way, this is very important because our scientific world wants to end there when we explain things. They don't want to use the fourth explanation, fourth category, the fourth cause, and that's the teleological cause. The teleological cause asks the why question. Why is it here? What is the purpose of this thing? What is the purpose of this thing? Now, before I go any further, think about how important this is. Explain me. What am I? A male human being. What am I made of? Bones and flesh and hair, cells, molecules. How did I get here? My parents. Does that fully explain a human being? From a scientific point of view, sure. But that leaves me with no purpose, no meaning. Yeah, so why am I here? Why are you here rather than not here? Have you ever asked that question? Why are you here rather than not here? It's going to ruin you the rest of your day. The answer is love. Your parents loved each other. Yeah? And their parents loved each other, even if it was a faulty love and not a perfect love. Why are human beings here rather than not? Because we can just keep going to great-grandparents or whatever. The love of God kind of changes your outlook, doesn't it? Right? Back to that dry erase marker, and I try to pull this out of my students. I go, why is it here? Why is it here? And they're dumbfounded. They don't know. And I go, they're like, well, to write. So? To write on a board. So? To give me information. So? I finally want to get them to this idea of education. And I would say this particular dry erase marker would not exist in this time and place unless there was such a concept of education. That's the why. And by the way, why do we have education? Love. Right? We think you're valuable, that we should give you information that delights you, right? So this is the teleological why question. Now, Martin Luther thought that we couldn't determine teleological causes. He didn't think we could answer the why question of things. Now, he says that and then starts saying why things happen and stuff. He never preached to himself very well. Yeah. Why is this important here? Because we all want to give some sort of philosophical, metaphysical, historical meaning to events that are right in front of us. Remember Katrina? Do you remember the mayor of New Orleans getting up and said something about God punishing New Orleans? No. You don't know the why. You don't know the why. So here's a couple things that I saw online right after Donald Trump in his campaign for presidency was almost assassinated. The one on the left is an angel overlooking Donald Trump at that speech in Pennsylvania. And the angel says, not today. Hell cannot stop what God has ordained. So that this angel protected Donald Trump and just hit that bullet just a little bit so it hit his ear and not his skull. Almost immediately, people said, the reason for this was because God wants Donald Trump to be president. Now you've mixed a theological thing with a political thing, right? Okay. So this other meme is making fun of that first meme. I'm an angel. God sent me to deflect this bullet away from a philandering, whoremongering, adulterous, business cheating, religious pretender into the body of a retired firefighter, because remember, that bullet killed somebody. You know? Live by the law, die by the law. Right? Be careful that you're not saying, oh, I see these political events, that means God must be doing these things. Like the end of the world is coming next Tuesday or something like that. Be careful, that's not your job. Your job is to be faithful. Let me give you an example of this in post-World War II Europe, which is similar and dissimilar to our situation today. After World War II, Germany lost, by the way. Do we remember that? Okay. You don't know. I teach kids. They don't know what happened last year, let alone 20th century. Germany lost a war, and the Allies are going to pump a bunch of money in to rebuild Germany because they know that they need to rebuild Germany. There's not enough workers. I remember hearing a lecture by Thomas Schleiermacher in France, of all places. He was an expert on Islam in Europe. And he said they needed a bunch of cheap labor in Europe, and so there was many Turkish families that came over. In fact, Germany invited a bunch of Turkish families over to be workers because they had all this money and they needed to rebuild, but they didn't have the manpower because of their big loss in World War II. That's why if you go to Europe, in every town, I don't care how small it is, there is a Daner kebab shop. Does anybody know what a Daner kebab is? Like a little gyro? Yeah. Good food, yeah. The theory was this. This is Schleiermacher lecturing to me. The theory was this. Your first generations are going to come over and they're going to be Turkish, both in their culture, their food, their language, and their religion, Islam. The second generation will be half Turkish, half European. The third generation will be mostly European with just some sort of cultural stuff. They'll be Turkish Germans, right? Which you can see in America, right? Some of you can trace this in your own family, right? We were this. And then the second generation had foot in the old world and the new world. But you got the third, fourth, fifth generation. They were American. They just had a whatever name, a Hispanic name or a German name or a French name, right? That did not happen in Germany. And many became radicalized. So think of the Olympics in the 70s, right? And they didn't quite become as German as people and European as they thought. It's a problem. I get that that's a problem when you bring a mass group of people over that has a different way of thinking about laws and ethics and religion and culture. That's going to change things. In the last 20 years, there have been a lot of credible reports of Muslims in Germany and France having dreams where they're told to go to a church. Some even claim that Jesus has appeared to them. And they go to the church and they end up becoming Christian. There's a very silent movement for Islamic people turning to Christianity in Europe right now, and has been going on the last 20 years. And this is not just blogs or whatever. These are national newspapers reporting this. Now, I don't know, because I don't do teleological causes. Well, I'm going to do it anyway. Maybe God said to Christian Europe, I'm sending you a bunch of people that need to be converted to your doorstep. And they didn't do it, and so he's finally like, I'm just going to send them dreams. Kind of like with what he did with Peter. You remember that? Peter should have known that it's okay to eat unclean foods. And I don't know that this is the motivation of Jesus, but I always thought that was weird that Peter got a dream with unclean animals, and God's like, go kill and eat. That was a weird, it seemed like out of character. I wonder if Jesus was like, Peter, you are so slow. I'm just going to send you a dream. I wonder if. We got a lot of immigrants from Somali. We got a lot of immigrants from all over the place. Part of my childhood was in Detroit, Michigan. It's a very, very Muslim area, but also a very Christian Middle Eastern area, right? There's Christians from the Middle East as well. And Turkish immigrants in the 50s to Germany are something different than Somali immigrants to Minneapolis. I understand that. Cultures are different. Time is different. The politics are different. But maybe, just maybe, God's bringing us people that need to be converted on our doorstep. So to think about that balance, to say, yeah, we kind of don't want Sharia law in America. Yeah, that would be bad. But also an opportunity to convert, right? So something to think about too, right? All right, let's think about this. All right. I like 1 Corinthians 13, which is known as the great love chapter, right? Love is patient and is kind and all this. My favorite part is the beginning, when Paul says you can have a faith that moves mountains, but if you have not love, you're just a clanging cymbal, a resounding gong. I like to replace faith with anything. You can have an apologetic argument that could move mountains, right? You could have a political vision that could move mountains. But if you have not love, you are only a clanging cymbal. You are only adding to the noise, the cacophony, and annoying the rest of us along the way, right? And so there's this balance between truth and love, right? I can get up in this pulpit, your pastor can get up in this pulpit and do nothing but give you truth, but if there is not gospel love, what would be the point? Now, this is fascinating to me. Who is love? God is love. Who is truth? God is truth. We don't split him up, right? He is both truth and love, right? Sometimes we split those things up, and sometimes we have to. But think about that for a little bit, right? If I have a political vision that can move mountains, but if I have not love, maybe I'm just making noise. Okay, all right. By the way, let me go back to that just for a second. So after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, however you want to term that murder, immediately there was people online who said, if your pastor does not address this in the pulpit on that Sunday, you need to find a new church. And then the response was, here's all the other people that have been assassinated. Why didn't they, right? In the last week, whatever. There started to be this movement where it was like, if your pastor does not address this particular thing, he's bad. There was also this idea, I don't think a Christian in their right mind could be anything but Republican. Because here is the Republican platform, and this clearly lines up more with the Bible than the Democratic platform. So you have big-time people, Frank Turek's one of them, who would say, I don't understand how you could vote for anything Republican. And there was a lot of pressure on preachers to do that, to say something. And if they didn't say enough or if they didn't say too little, it was just a no-win situation, right? It was just a no-win situation. And I want to say to people this, that I'm going to have somebody, and I'm thinking about people in my own life. I have somebody who is such a libertarian that he doesn't vote, because he says he doesn't want to encourage government. He refuses to vote. He's a very high intellectual doctorate, all this kind of stuff. Okay. I got somebody who says this is a political thing, the platform, you have to vote Republican. I got people who would say, I don't care about platforms, I care about the integrity of the person in the office. I have people who would say, listen, you can have all the rules about abortion and homosexuality and all this, but that doesn't change hearts. And I think the Republican Party is really doing damage to the Christian message. And I could have somebody come in and with whatever, and as a pastor, I have to love every one of them with the gospel. I don't get to choose. I don't get to choose. Even if I disagree with how they think political things should be played out. I don't have a choice, right? And I think you got to love first, right? Specifically with the gospel, and then you can have conversations later on about things. All right? Okay. All right. This is going to get deep. I got 15 minutes. Whew, let's do this. This is going to get deep. Everybody worships, even the atheist worships. And what I mean by that is everybody has a number one. They have what we call an ultimate. An ultimate is the most important thing. This is the thing that you hold on to, that if you let go, you are afraid that you will lose yourself. Yeah? So it could be your nation state, could be your political party, could be your money, could be your family, could be your kids' travel sports. Yeah? You ever get that guy yelling at the umpire at the B girls basketball team? That guy's putting too much into that, right? It's the thing you hold on to that if you feel that if you lose it, you lose yourself. That's the ultimate thing. That thing becomes your God. Because it does what a God does. It gives you meaning. It gives you truth. It gives you a sense of how I judge myself as righteous or not, moral or not, and it gives me ultimately my identity. I'm a fill in the blank. This is a very good thing to ask yourself. Who are you? How would you answer that? How would you answer that question, who are you? I am. Many of you will put your name. Some of you would put your nationality, your job. I hope some of you eventually would say child of God. Yeah? If you were the only pick a race in this group, you may say, I am that. That's what distinguishes you, that gives your identity. The ultimate is the thing that gives you identity, meaning, purpose, truth, morality. Everything else is penultimate. That just means what comes before the ultimate. Everything from our Christian point of view that is penultimate is a gift that God has given you. He has given you life. He has given you food. He has given you money. He has given you drink. He has given you family. He's given you a country. He's given you a church. He's given you all of these things. Those are penultimate things. If you hold on to one of those penultimate things, your family, your money, your job, your nation state, your political party, a politician or whatever, if you hold on to it as if it's an ultimate thing, two things happen. One is you'll be very disappointed because that penultimate gift cannot do what an ultimate thing can do. That is what a divine being can do. And along the way, you will hold on so tightly to that gift that you will ruin the gift. Money can ruin you. Politics can ruin you. Alcohol can ruin you. If you hold on so tightly to your family and everything is about your family, you can ruin the relationship with your children and your grandchildren, can't you? Right? Okay. So, the reason I bring this up right now is because I really do believe, and we're not going to have time to go through all this, so if you can't read it, don't worry about it. The reason I bring this up right now is that we live in a time where people do not have a story that gives them all these things that only an ultimate thing can give them. Let me explain. I need a story and you need a story. A story has a beginning and an end. It has a hero and a villain. It has meaning, purpose. It has a transgression or like a linear moment of acts kind of stuff. That was a dumb way to say it, but yeah, this thing happened, then this thing happened. Subsequent events. If I don't have a story that I can see myself as a part of, then I don't have placedness. And if I don't have a place, I will search for it. And I may become resentful of people who do have a story that gives them a place. The American dream is a story. Yeah? It has a beginning, 1776. It has heroes, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln. It has a morality. If you work hard, then you will achieve the American dream. It has a goal. It has an ending, the pursuit of happiness. It has all the things that we need to get up out of bed in the morning. I need a story to get out of bed in the morning. I need meaning and purpose. Once that story goes away, then I don't have anything that gives me meaning, and I can start spiraling down. Now, I'm going to introduce you to the idea of a strong story. Here's what a God does, by the way. Life, order, morality, truth, purpose, identity. This idea of story. I'm going to come back to that. You can have strong stories and true stories. You need a story, but it doesn't need to be true. You ever thought about that? You need a story, but it doesn't actually need to be true. Is the American dream true? I think. For some of us. Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's how I grew up, right? Work hard, it'll be fine. You're always going to have more money than your parents. Not so much the case anymore. Communist bad, America good, miracle on ice. That was enough for us as a country to tie us together. Didn't matter if it was true or not, it was something that tied us together. This is what the great myths of the ancient world did. The Greek myths, the Roman myths, the stories that were told in Babylon and Egypt and that kind of stuff. Christianity is a strong story. It's also a true story. Our young men in particular are looking for a story. This is an opportunity for the church to say, here is your story. It has all of the things. It has problems, solution, heroes, villains, meaning, all of these things. I'm convinced that the guy who murdered Charlie Kirk, it didn't matter that he was against Kirk or had some, he just needed something. He just needed something. Let me tell you one more thing that will back this up. There was a study in British Columbia. People in Canada realized that the suicide rates for people of First Nations, that's what they call Native. We call them Native Americans, they say First Nations. That the suicide rates in First Nations in some tribes were sky high, like way above the Canadian average. But some tribes had like almost no childhood, teenage, young adult suicides. Like none. And like, we got to study this. And they figured out that the tribes that told the stories, that kept the stories alive, gave enough meaning to their young people that they had a placidness and they didn't fall apart when things went bad. Didn't matter if it's true. Just needed a story. The ones who did not keep the customs and the stories going, that's the ones that had the high suicide rates. Let me go back to this idea of a heavy burden. Now, think about our culture for a very long time now. This was my childhood, like what were we told by teachers, by coaches, by parents, by the culture? Believe in yourself. You can do anything. Be yourself. Stand out. Be true to yourself. Live your own life. You be you, right? Nothing that I've just said you haven't heard a million times, right? Okay. Now, think about then a teenager today who is supposed to identify themselves And it's a free-for-all. You can identify yourself male, female, whatever you want. You're supposed to live your own life. So come up with your own truth, your own right and wrong, your own identity, your own story. You have to craft your own identity and your own story. Now, by definition, truth, morality, identity, meaning cannot come from an individual person, because that's just an opinion, right? And maybe your opinion's different than mine. Truth, morality, identity, meaning, I would add certainty to that, can only come from outside of us and can only come from, by definition, a divine being, right? You can't know truth absolutely because you don't have all the information. You don't have all the information, right? And does your mind not play tricks on you? I don't think you can be certain of anything. And so the divine being, by definition, forget Christian God, forget anything. You want to call it the universe or being itself, whatever. This thing is the only thing that can do the things, identity, truth, morality, certain, that kind of stuff. Think about the burden we have placed on that 13-year-old girl. It is a divine-sized burden on her shoulders. No wonder we have a mental health crisis right now. No wonder we do, right? And I think that idea of you be yourself, come up with your own whatever, was sort of just kind of pop psychology for the last 100 years in America. Be yourself, hyper-individualistic or whatever. But we kind of understood that there was still truth out there that was absolute. There was a right and a wrong, whether I felt like it or not. There was truth and falsity, whether I believed that we landed on the moon or not. Those kinds of things. But eventually that sort of philosophical, there is no truth, there is no morality, you can identify yourself, eventually takes over the culture. And I think that is why we find ourselves in this place of absurdity right now. So when I look at somebody who is saying, I'm a whatever, here are my pronouns, all this kind of stuff, I got two options. I can go anger or I can go sadness. And I think you should go sadness, because they're doing exactly what our culture told them to do for the last 100 years. And that has come up with their own truth, morality, identity, and certainty, and that will kill you. And their desperation to lash out and say, demand that you all bow down to their thoughts, is a desperate ploy. It's the last gasp of this absurd idea that we can have an existence without a divine being. And as much as it is absurd right now in our culture, and it is, I mean, it's just absolutely absurd, isn't it? Right? We're not even trying to do truth anymore, right? I wonder if this is a moment where now in the future we're going to start rebuilding things. I think about it like a big wave. Here is the culture, this big wave, hundreds and hundreds of years, and we're little surfers on that. And we think we're going back and forth and we got it, but we're moving like this. And it will come crashing down. Are we going to be ready as the church and a culture to rebuild it? And I think how we rebuild it is first gospel, but also let's teach some logic, some philosophy, some history, some art, all the things that we're like, that doesn't make you a lot of money, so don't do that anymore, right? And so I think our Christian heritage of a liberal arts education, of human rights, of all the things that the church really did so well for centuries, this is the antidote. And by the way, I don't think winning a political election here or there is going to change that as much as this idea of slowly rebuilding the culture. That does not mean that we don't participate in politics. I'm just not putting my hope in it. That's me surfing up and down on here. We got a bigger thing that we need to deal with. Okay, so this is what I mean by borrowed capital. I'm over time right now, but give me a couple minutes. We have been living off the borrowed capital of a Judeo-Christian worldview. Human rights, right and wrong, all these, as opposed to kind of a polytheistic pagan worldview of Rome, Greece, Babylon, and Egypt. And everybody is living off of that, but I think we've spent it without putting stuff back in. All right. So, what about the future? Only a fool would predict the future, so I'm going to do it. I already think you see it. I think you've been seeing it for the last 30 years. Classical education is becoming a big deal. If you notice that young men are coming back to church, that'll be a little blip on the map, or on the timeline, I'm sure. But they're coming for something serious. They want a story that's grounded in truth and morality. For a very long time, our sermons were like, hey, life's kind of tough because whatever, and Jesus loves you, and, we're all just sort of Christian, and, maybe blame the Democrats or the Republicans, depending on what flag flies in front of your church. These men in particular, but women too, but these men in particular, are coming for philosophy. They're coming for something deep. They're coming for something deep. And I think that the future will be like, they're going to rebuild it, but I also think that there's a lot of people, and you see this on the right in particular, that are going to take that and say Western civilization, and you're going to use that in a political way to be anti-whatever. Yeah? Okay, so let me give you some gospel. This is a story that bothered me for 40 years. I'm a slow learner. Do you remember David? He was king of Israel, but before he took the control of Israel, there was still another king, Saul. Like for a long time, there was two kings. There was Saul and there was David, and God had wanted David to be king because he had rejected Saul, but Saul was still in charge, and so David was kind of in Saul's court, and then eventually Saul starts to become jealous and attacks David. David's got an army and Saul's got an army. You got a civil war in your hands. And there was a couple situations where David had the jump on Saul, not just his armies, but David individually with Saul. Do you remember this sort of weird situation? Saul goes into a cave to relieve himself. And David goes, and David could have very easily, he's a younger man, David had the jump on Saul. He could have easily could have ended the war years earlier and saved hundreds of lives, right? You remember this argument, yeah? Do you remember what David did? Just cut off a little bit of his robe to say, I had you, but he didn't kill Saul, and that always bothered me. He knew that he was anointed by God. That was his enemy. This was war. He could have ended the war. Why didn't he do it? And the reason for that is David was called to be king and not king slayer. Okay, fine, but what does that mean? I think it meant that David was going to let it play out. And he was not going to take matters into his own hands. He was called to be general, he was called to wage war, but he was not called to kill the anointed one of God, because Saul had been the anointed one of God. And if you remember, one of the soldiers later who finished Saul off, what does David have with that guy? Kills him. The guy's like, look, I killed Saul. Looking for a promotion. David's like, execute him. You don't know what God is doing. You don't know what God is doing. You are called in your vocation to be faithful, to be honest, to be loving, and to keep going back to the gospel. Let it play out. This is a moment of absurdity. But the church has survived far greater troubles than what we are facing right now, and very often came back stronger. You don't know what God is doing. Let it play out. So I would suggest don't storm the Capitol. Right? Vote your conscience. Have conversations that are decent and honest. Be the person that's decent and honest. Let's double down on Christian education. Let's preach the gospel. Let's do it again and again and again, because history has a way of teaching us this. God will get us through, and we'll come out stronger in the end only if we have the gospel. All right. I thank you for your time. I apologize if you wanted me to tell you how to vote, but I ain't going to do it. All right. I'm out of time. Thanks for having me. All right.
Thank you again, Dr. Berg. I just, if it's okay, I might open up the dangerous thing, open it up for questions if you're okay.
That's fine.
That.
And if you need to leave, you will not hurt my feelings,
feel free
but
if
I'll
you
stay
need to
here. I'll
take
stay
off.
here.
But I just wanted an opportunity, if there's anything, this thought-provoking discussion had any questions for you that you might want to ask Dr. Berg. Oh boy, there's not going to be a single one now, is there? I'll give you.
When you do,
right, here we go.
This
Perfect.
is a vicar moment. Okay, when you do this, he'll learn when he's a real pastor. When you learn, you have a question ready to go get it going.
Got it. I've got one in the back here. I'm going to bring a microphone.
This is how he learns. This is how he learns.
Hello? Check. All right.
Is it okay for a Christian to be a politician?
Absolutely. In fact, that was a debate in the Reformation, and Lutherans were like, absolutely, absolutely. Just remember that your vocation as a politician, right, is something than your vocation as a member of the church. And so I think it's a beautiful thing and a wonderful thing, right? We need more. We need more. I just don't think that you should be passing out election buttons in the narthex. You know what I mean? Right? And I think there used to be a time there's no golden age in the world. There's no golden age, right? By the way, you all have a golden age. It was when you were 12. If you had a good childhood, right? Because that's when you kind of got stuff, but you didn't know that your parents were idiots yet. That came later. Life is good, right? So when you go the good old days, like the good old days for some of you are like, oh, the 60s. Mine were the 80s. I totally forget that we had to like hide under desks in case there was an atomic bomb, because that was going to save us, right? So I think that there was a time though where Republicans and Democrats could say, "Hey, we still go to the same church, we still live next to each other, and we don't have to kill each other." That's the true meaning of tolerance. So not only do I think Christians can be politicians, they should be politicians, and I think you should vote. Right? And you should be a thoughtful voter. Just there's one thing more important, that's your citizenship of heaven, right? Yeah.
Other thoughts, questions from the group? All right, my question.
Here we go. Yes,
here
sir.
we go.
You mentioned that Christianity, or what the politicians are doing to Christianity is going to be bad for it in the end, right?
Say that again.
Well, you made a
You're good.
you made a comment about Christianity connected with politics, the way it's happening today, like maybe what Trump is saying or what the vice president is saying, or how that's going to be eventually be bad for Christianity.
Yeah. So the question is, can politicians say things that would be bad for Christianity? I think so, and I think this is not just true of like Republicans. This is true of Democrats too, right? And both of them are saying here is what the law is and not so much the gospel. And I think the danger is if you say, I'm the Christian politician, well, half the country is not going to like you. And I'm concerned that then they would say, I don't want to be Christian then because of that. And so it can give Christianity a bad name. So I think, Paul often talks about making your goal be like, trying to think of the words here, but like a quiet life, a subtle life, right? If I'm using my Christianity for power, that's a problem, right? That's a problem. But I think it's a beautiful thing if somebody says that's a remarkable leader, and I know that their Christian faith made them that way. That's good. What's bad is if you say, this is a Christian crusade against whatever, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Wasn't our country is founded on Judeo-Christian beliefs of the Constitution? That wasn't there and the early fathers that created the Constitution were basically mostly Christian or Jewish, and that's what they're trying to push us back to and eliminate the.
So the question here is, our founding fathers were Christian or deist mostly, and they were certainly based on a Judeo-Christian worldview. Let me explore that a little bit. This is an interesting question. Is America a Christian nation? And a lot of us would say no, just because, well, it's not a theocracy in the sense that all of these other countries were. We specifically said we're not going to pick a religion, right? And it's true, like a lot of our founding fathers were deists. They didn't believe that Jesus was Lord, and so they are definition not Christians. But if you would ask a Hindu immigrant today if America was a Christian nation, they'd be like, yeah, of course it is, right? Here's my phrase that I think is true, but doesn't answer the question. Is America a Christian nation? No, but you don't have America without Christianity. You just don't. And so, even a thoughtful secular person will understand that. And I think this is why Europe is the way it is. They understand cultural Christianity is very important. This explains the French, if you could ever explain the French. Like a very secular religion, but they will put $1 billion into rebuilding Notre Dame because they understand that there's a culture behind it, right? So I'm not indifferent to the idea, like if we lose our Christian mooring, America's going to look different. Of course it is. My main concern is the citizenship of heaven, not the citizenship of the United States, right? Can I go down this road? Would this be okay? Okay. This is interesting to me. A group needs a tie that binds them together. And I think there's maybe 5 or 6 historical ties that bind groups of people together. Language, ethnicity, geography, culture, and religion. So we all speak the same language. We all live on the same island, geography. We all have the same religion, like think of Israel, right? Or something, or Saudi Arabia or something like that. Some sort of shared culture, whatever my 5th one was, right? Theoretically, or ethnicity was the last one, ethnicity. Theoretically, America has rejected all 5 of those ties that bind us together. We refuse to have a national language. Geography doesn't bother us at all. Mountains, oceans, that's all right. Bring in Hawaii, right? We do not have one culture. We have multiple different cultures. We do not have one ethnicity. We're a melting pot. And we have always had different sort of religions, even if it was just within Christianity, but there was always Jewish people, there was always, right? We rejected that. What's the tie that binds the United States together?
There is that.
Okay. This is a total young person answer. He said, nothing. That's why we're so divisive. It's an idea. Someone said freedom. It's the Constitution. That is a very fragile, thin string. Isn't it? By the way, kingdoms, empires, or whatever, they come and go. But you got about 500 years maybe, historically. What are we at? Yeah, 250 if you come from 1776. Is there anything in the United States that says we're going to be the ones that are going to be the ones that just totally, we're going to last forever? You really think that? Go read the Old Testament, please. Right? So, who knows? And we are moving from a modern period to a postmodern period, and America's only known a modern period. Something's going to look different in 50, 100 years from now. I don't know what it's going to be. By the way, I'm convinced, though, that we are actually entering a more spiritual age, and rather than a scientific, materialistic age. And that's going to be really weird for science. You already see it, right? You see a whole... I teach high school too, not just college. And I'll ask the high schoolers, I'm like, you don't have to raise your hand if not, but how many of you have people in your family that use crystals? You would be appalled at how many hands go up. Totally unembarrassed by that, right? We're going into a more spiritual age, which actually is an advantage for us because it's an open marketplace for ideas, and I think we win that if we can put some good stuff out there. But I don't think that we're going to be dominant politically, right? That's okay. That's okay. God never promised that. God never promised that. So I'm actually, honestly, very bullish on the future of the church in America and in the world. I really am. I'm not saying that. I say it because I have this certainty that the gates of Hades will not prevail, and Jesus rose from the dead. We're going to be fine. But if you want to read the tea leaves, I think there's going to be a resurgence of really strong Christianity. I think maybe the days of cultural Christianity may be over. To that I say, good riddance, right? But I think that you're going to see some serious Christianity come out of this. Maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic, but I have every right to be. Yeah.
Worldwide, right?
Not just America, worldwide.
India, Iran is, I've heard this, the fastest growing Christian country.
Yeah, one of the fastest growing. Iran has a lot of Christians. Yeah. By the way, the future of the church is African. Maybe Southeast Asian. Do you know that there are 7 to 8 million Lutherans in Indonesia? How many are in America? Not that many, right? The future is actually quite bright. Atheists are on the run, and they'll admit it. They know it. Atheists are on the run, yeah. But this does not mean that the future will be Christian. It'll just be some sort of spirituality. Yeah. Go ahead. You get one more, and that's it.
I just want to know if you're aware of this. You mentioned earlier about suicide rate, something like that, on Native American tribes. Okay. Yeah. My daughter is married to Apache Indian, or Donald, okay, and we're aware of the situation pretty much there, and how the tribe really owns all the land, or you can't, you people that own homes there, they're owned by the tribe. Mm-hmm. Tribe takes care of all that stuff, So there's no value in a property value, or that can't sell it at any bad. So, but the question I have, are you aware of a Lumbee tribe in South Carolina, North Carolina?
Not.
Are you aware of them?
I'm not.
Okay. If you go onto YouTube and John Stossel and Tribe, there's a video that it talks about it. And the Lumbee tribe, this goes back to the 1970s or 60s, something like that. They diluted the land, was my understanding. Mm-hmm. They gave the land to the members of the tribes of it. Mm-hmm. So now the tribe is very happy, very well off, well doing things. In fact, one of those members there out there started the Crackerville Race Car. I just thought maybe you knew something about it. But I want to go out there this summer yet. I like to drive out to talk with the tribe and see what happens.
Yeah. So for those of you who couldn't hear, like the idea of like tribes owning all the land, and maybe that's a part of the socio-economic problem. They can't sell and buy land. My church was by a reservation too, so I'm somewhat familiar with this. And then this tribe in North Carolina that allowed people to have individual properties. I'm okay with that being something that could change the socio-economic situation there. But back to your idea of suicide, here's 2 reasons why we have problems with suicide. And there's many reasons, but I'm going to give you 2. One, you need a story. The other one is you need a theology of suffering. Right? For a long time, even in the Christian church, the modern period was like, we will always progress and get better. Émile Coué, the French poet, said, I look in the mirror every day and I say, every day in every way I'm getting better. There was a huge optimism of humanism, that we could figure out truth, morality, we would fix our problems. This is why Ted Williams froze his head, because he figured by now we could have regenerated him already. He was an atheist, by the way, yeah. But the promises of modernity, so think like 1500 to 2000, did not all come true. And that's why we have a lot of angst right now, because people are saying this modern liberal idea, free markets, freedom of religion, free all that's not working because things have not gotten better. Now, I think they have, but they have not gotten better. You promised the world to us, Enlightenment thinkers, and now we still have wars, we have an opioid epidemic, we have all these kinds of things. And so people are trying to like reject sort of the things that you're saying, and I think that's not completely incorrect, but it's also very dangerous. Back to my point about suicide. Why do ancient people not commit suicide at the same rate and the same reasons that we do today? Because they had a meaning for their suffering. It was almost always wrong. Doesn't have to be a true story. Why does my village in the south of France have the plague in 1350? Well, because God is angry at us, right? Kill the witches. Right? You know? They're like, no, it's because you're throwing your chamber pots out in the street. You have your rats and viruses and whatever. Well, then I fix that scientifically, but I don't have a reason for my suffering, and my suffering keeps on going. You see the problem. You need a theology of suffering. Because if life is to have meaning, then suffering has to have meaning, and half of life is suffering, and that's not a good day in Mequana, let alone a bad day in Haiti. Right? So here's an opportunity specifically for the Lutheran Church, who has the theology of the cross, to really do some deep thinking about that. And I don't know that we did in the last 50 years. Yeah.
When we think about ourselves as Christians, we think about Christ, and we think about the joy that we have in our resurrected Savior and the justification that we have. There's another theological term called sanctification. And I wonder if there are pastors in this politically charged world who are almost afraid to speak and to encourage sanctification because of the politics involved with it. What do you mean, care for
Yeah.
an immigrant? What do you mean, care for that person who is a criminal? What do you mean, care for?
Yeah.
And look at the life of Jesus. But you become a little bit, perhaps, afraid of that? I don't know.
Yeah. So the idea that I mean, when a Lutheran preacher gets in the pulpit, he is afraid of sanctification because he doesn't want to put law out there and people go away, you know, with the burden. I have found that it's very helpful to really encourage the idea of vocation, that you are called to do God's work as his co-worker in here, and it's a privilege and it's an honor. And then the idea that because I'm a saint, I'm a sinner, but I'm also a saint. A sinner will always sin, but a saint always saints. By definition, right? Paul, you're a slave to sin, but you're also a slave to righteousness. And to maybe point out to people, like, you actually do have these moments in life when you do what is kind and generous and good for no other reason than that's just who you are. Those are rare moments, but really, really do them. And then maybe say, hey, you're light in this world. Can you find one thing? You know, besides my job, being a parent, being a whatever, can you find one thing where you can be saint in this world? And then to be serious about your vocation as citizen as well, right? And not just go just because my parents voted this way or that way, whatever. By the way, we didn't have time for this, but lose the labels liberal and conservative. Let me just give you this phrase here real quick. The word liberal and conservative have been foisted upon the church, and we have taken them in uncritically. Search all of church history or scripture, you will not find those terms. I am pro-life not because I'm conservative, but because I've thought about the issue. I don't want the public school doing prayer. I went to public school and I had nice teachers, but Mrs. Levine my 6th grade teacher was praying to a different God than I was. I don't want that done. I don't want school prayer, not because I'm liberal, but because I've thought it through. The danger of labels is to say, if I'm liberal, if I'm conservative, then I must take everything that the conservative party at any given time or any of the liberal party at any given time. And you know what gets lost? The person and the issue, right? It should always be the telos of love should always be the person, not the politics, and not my labels, that kind of thing. All right.
We'll call it time with
I'm
that.
gonna, I'm
Thank
gonna,
you very much.
I'm skating out of here before I get in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Dr. Berg, for this presentation. It was just very well thought, and we just really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
You're free to go. Please grab some snacks on the way out. There are a lot of them left, so please grab something on your way out. Have a blessed day.